Disclaimer: the views and opinions expressed in this episode are those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of USA Global TV and Radio. The content presented is for informational purposes only and is intended to foster open discussion and debate. Viewer discretion is advised. USA Global TV and Radio does not endorse any particular viewpoint and encourages viewers to seek out additional information and perspectives. Saving America with Dr. David D. Schein.
Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.
Welcome to Saving America. This is your host, Dr. David D. Schein. Trump's first big state of the nation. What a change from Demented Joe. A couple of observations to start. The human trash known as Representative Al Green was thrown out of the Trump speech due to his deliberate and disrespectful shouts. Of course, he is a Dem. Unfortunately, does represent part of the greater Houston area. Hopefully, future redistricting and the Trump impact in this red state will dump this loser. Republicans showed a great deal more respect to Demented Joe over the prior 4 years. A sidelight mentioned by many commentators involved a kind of act by Trump staff as DJ Daniel, a 13-year-old recovering from brain cancer, was made an honorary Secret Service agent. Reports are that not a single Dem applauded this act. We cannot heal this country if the Dems cannot even applaud this kind act for a brave young man. I am well established as not a Trumpster. His speech was over an hour and a half. Nobody needs to speak that long at any one time, including me, for example. A consulting firm client of mine once said, "The mind cannot absorb what the butt cannot endure." Due to past promises, he has issues already. He promised to end Ukraine in a couple days. How's that going, Mr. President? He also promised to immediately end the inflation we all endured during the Biden administration. Costs for consumers have actually gone up in the last 6 weeks. He told Hamas if all hostages were not returned a couple weeks ago, there would be hell to pay. Hey, I'm still waiting. Please, whatever happened to the famous under-promise and over-deliver? Now, at the same time, he is honestly trying to deliver on his long list of campaign promises. There is no question that he's done more in 6 weeks than Biden-Harris did in 4 years. Much of it good. His uplifting theme was America is back, and speaking as someone who teaches leadership, a key to a successful organization is certainly a positive message. Demented Joe and his Dem buddies failed to do so, and they are still failing to have a positive message. Criticizing Trump alone is not going to bail them out. In a hilarious twist, a freshman senator gave the so-called Dem response. Basically, the many Dems senior to this senator have burned all of their bridges. The kicker was that her response sounded like Trump's list, certainly not Dem priorities. Of course, Doge and Elon Musk were prominently featured. Some of the latest examples of the terrible waste of tax dollars included $8 million for making mice transgender. The Department of Health and Human Services spent $22 billion to provide free housing and cars for illegal aliens. $47 million for diversity, equity, and inclusion scholarships in Burma. $40 million to improve social and economic inclusion of sedentary migrants, whatever the heck that is. Trump did indicate a breakthrough with Ukraine, which I'll discuss separately. Trump has achieved a major reduction in illegal immigration over the southern border, more than a 90% reduction in just a few weeks. So that's a big win. He also declared some of the gangs that have walked into the USA as terrorist organizations, making it easier for them to be captured and deported. It is still troubling that there are so-called sanctuary cities and states. This is the focus of a congressional investigation at this time. The immigration control people are also looking into this. I would label them anti-American policies, not sanctuary cities, which sounds very benevolent, but it's not. Thousands died or have been forced into trafficking or slavery due to the prior immigration mess. And millions and millions and millions of dollars of taxpayer money have been spent on these illegals instead of on American citizens or on reducing our unreal tax burden. And remember, I still support expanded legal immigration. To summarize, typical Trump overspeak, but still a much better start than anything we've seen in the last 4 years. As we record this episode, Ukrainian President Zelensky is apparently realizing that Trump's shout at him, "You have no cards," is really true. While he can get some help from Europe, he must have the advanced heavy weaponry and the financial support coming from the USA. The security guarantees in exchange for access to rare minerals is a smart dealer, and as a taxpayer, I support Trump's approach to this. At the same time, I agree with Zelensky that the deranged Russian leader Putin can't be trusted. My motto is, if a commie is still breathing, he is lying. He needs to have some late losses in the game, and he is still running. Further, he should never have been able to travel outside of a few countries allied with this war criminal. More anti-Semitic nonsense on the Columbia campus. Many of us thought that with the terrible sight of coffins of babies and their mother, while Hamas and its Palestinian sycophants celebrated, that even the most whacked out of the pro-Hamas crew might back off. Well, not so fast. Described as a pro-Palestinian mob, there was another takeover at Bernard College part of Columbia University. Note that 2 employees were injured, one of the 2 required hospitalization. It is time for these university administrators to grow a pair and authorize the use of tear gas and other crowd control methods, along with criminal prosecution. While the wealthy Ivies may be able to absorb the loss, speaking as a taxpayer, I want all funding terminated for colleges that tolerate in any way such foolishness. First, this is not pro-Palestinian, this is anti-Semitic. Second, they are helping the cowardly Hamas, slaughtering innocent adults and children while they hide behind civilians. Third, time for the slopstream media to join the majority of Americans who support civilization and Israel, our shining light in the entire Middle East. We need to start calling out this insanity. The solar company, which received $3 billion from the Biden loans, warns it might go bankrupt. According to a report by the Washington Free Beacon, Sunnova Energy received the largest federal loan to a solar company in history. My question, why is any government money loaned or given to any company that is not directly connected with advancing the military interests of the USA? Note that I favor solar and alternative energy sources, but it has to be done based on the markets, not the insane decisions of an out-of-control Dem whack jobs. Where was the GOP when this nonsense happened? Where was the slopstream media? This is reminiscent of Solyndra, a solar company that ended up going bankrupt after getting over $500 million in our tax dollars from the Obama losers. SCOTUS blocks Trump from holding off certain USAID payments. It was a tight 5-4 decision, but I do support this limited ruling. To be clear, the $2 billion is a boatload of money, but this is for payments for services and goods that have already been delivered. We can debate for the future if America will make such commitments going forward. Note that I, along with most Americans, support medical aid, clean water, and food for distressed communities around the globe. But let's be realistic. America is broke, and it's time for others to step in and provide that aid. I also strongly suspect that due to poor administrative practices, much of the so-called humanitarian aid is going to warlords and corporate friends of the Dems and not to the people who really need the aid. Trump has been riding a wave of good business news. It is estimated that on the table are promises to invest over $1 trillion in the USA in the near term. On top of Apple with 500 billion, there are a couple of recent announcements, including Honda indicating that its new Civic will be built in the USA instead of Mexico. Taiwan Semiconductor has announced plans to invest $100 billion in USA to manufacture chips here instead of overseas. This company is the world's largest manufacturer of computer chips. Bear in mind that what made the COVID mess worse was the USA's overdependence on overseas manufacturing. So this is not only good for American workers, but it helps make the USA more secure in the event of future supply disruptions. Note that with the tariff wars with just about the rest of the world, it's never been a better time to manufacture in the USA. Trump announced those threatened tariffs from Mexico, Canada, and China would go into effect, but there's an indication of another delay. Many in our audience were not born or certainly not old enough to be aware of the horrors of 9/11. Please describe what happened that day and how it led to your book, Thunderdog. And of course, we already know that at age 14, you got your first guide dog. So how, just as we lead into this question, how long does a guide dog work with an individual? Because I know there's a year or two of training and then they only go a certain period of time. Is that correct?
Not a certain period of time. It's all about the health of the dog. So my second guide dog, Holland, actually worked 13 years. Now, we weren't doing a lot of walking around for the last few years, but he worked from 1973 until 1986. Wow. And I had arranged to get a third guide dog, and 2 weeks before, he collapsed out in our backyard, and we got him to the vet. The vet said, we can bring him back up, but he's not going to have a good quality of life. He's had a heart attack or a stroke or perhaps both. And so we had to say goodbye to Holland a little bit more suddenly than we had thought. But then 2 weeks later, I went up and got my third guide dog, Klondike, and began working with him. At the World Trade Center in 1999, when we opened the office for Quantum, I had just gotten my fifth guide dog, Roselle. And so Roselle and I went to the World Trade Center, and I spent time, as the leader of the office I was in, I knew that I needed to do what anyone else who was leading an office would do, but I had to do them differently. So for example, not only did I need to know what to do in an emergency and how to function, but I had to actually know it because I'm not going to read signs. And so I spent a lot of time walking around the complex, learning where things were, talking to the Port Authority, police, and fire departments, and so on, learning what the emergency evacuation procedures were, and so on. And what I didn't realize until many, many years later is that what I actually had done was developed a mindset that says, you know what to do if there's ever an emergency. You don't need to fear it. And I didn't realize that, but that's part of, I think, what my makeup is. But the bottom line is I learned all of that. And so I was well equipped to deal with running an office. And the other reason that I learned a lot of that was, as a leader of an office, if my salespeople brought in an employee, or excuse me, a guest to talk with us or see our products and then talk about possible proposals and contracts and so on, and during all of that, we decided to go to lunch. How was it going to look if I said, well, I don't know how to get anywhere around the World Trade Center. I'm blind. And 2 hours later, we're going to be back up in the office negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts? That doesn't work. I needed to know where things were so that I could say, what do you want for lunch? Oh, you like deli sandwiches? There's this great restaurant downstairs called Fine and Shapiro, which was good. And I'll take you there and literally lead the way. Now, my employees always, of course, said, well, he can really see, he's just faking it. You know, they teased me a lot, but they knew. And that's why we did some of the things, including those bright employees, the way we did, because they knew that I was going to work to impress the heck out of anybody who came in. Well, so on September 11th, we were going to be holding some seminars teaching some of our reseller partners how to sell our products. And at 8:45, I was in my office along with a colleague, David Frank, who had flown in the night before. David was going to be the person to talk about pricing and pricing models and so on, and help our reseller partners. My job was to be, and David didn't live there, so my job was to be the day-to-day technical contact, having a master's degree in physics, learning all the technical aspects of products, I even helped our sales engineers and service engineers diagnose problems sometimes. But the bottom line is that I knew how to do that and knew how to be technical because that's what my background was. So as I always also told all my salespeople, and it's something that I talk a lot about when I talk about teamwork and traveling the country or the world, speaking today, what I told them was, I hired you because you convinced me that you could sell. I hope that you will. But my job is not to boss you around, but rather to work with you to figure out how I can add value to what you do. And certainly having a technical knowledge that most of them didn't and being articulate and so on, that helped. And so I worked with salespeople to do all of that. So my job on September 11th was to be the guy doing the basic seminars, running a laptop projector slideshow, using my Braille script so that I knew everything about the slide presentations, including even where things would show up on the screen, because my wife and I created a very detailed script. And so at 8:45, we were getting ready to do the seminars, and the last thing we had to do was to create a list of all the people who would be coming so that we could fax it on letterhead to the Port Authority security people in order that they would know who's coming, so that when somebody came to the security desk, they could say, I'm supposed to go up to the 78th floor to Quantum, and the security people could say, what's your name, and check them off the list because it was on letterhead, and they were allowed to go up rather than having to call us every time one of the 50 people scheduled that day would be coming. So at 8:45, I was literally reaching for letterhead when suddenly the building sort of shuddered and shook. We heard a muffled kind of thud, and then it began to tip in one direction, as I'm now tipping my hand toward the camera. Literally, it tipped, I think, like 20 feet. Tall buildings like that are flexible. They're made to bend in the breeze because heavy windstorms and so on could shake buildings. And in fact, an airplane hit the Empire State Building during the 1940s, a military aircraft that got lost in a fog bank. So tall buildings are made to flex, and that's what happened when the airplane hit the building. Everybody says, of course, you didn't know what went on because you couldn't see it. And as I point out, the last time I checked, Superman and X-ray vision are fiction. The building was struck on the north side of its faces at about the 96th floor, technically between floors 93 and 99. We were on the 78th floor on the south side. Excuse me, no one knew what happened. And all the way down the stairs, with the hundreds of people that I interacted with, no one knew what happened because all of our people were on the other side of the building from where the plane hit. Anyway, David and I actually finally said goodbye to each other because we thought we were about to take a 78th floor plunge to the street when the building stopped and it started coming back the other way.
Wow.
And when it got vertical again, I went back into my office. I was standing in the doorway. I grew up on the San Andreas Fault in California, right? Building moves, go stand in doorway. Yeah, a lot of good that does on the 78th floor and you're standing by a non-bearing wall, but it's habit. Anyway, so the bottom line is that after the building stopped moving, I went back in and I met Roselle coming out from under my desk. I told her to heel, which meant to come around on my left side and sit, which she did. And about that time, the building dropped straight down about 6 feet. The reason it dropped is because the expansion joints that make the building flexible went back to their normal configuration, which is exactly what was supposed to happen. Then David looked out the windows and started seeing fire and smoke above us, and I could hear noises outside the window, and he described it as millions of pieces of burning paper falling outside our windows. And he kept saying, we got to get out of here. We can't stay here. We got to get out of here right now. Remember I mentioned that mindset before? It must have clicked in because what I started to say to David was, slow down, we'll get out. No, we got to get out of here right now. We can't stay here. The building's on fire. We had early arrivals, early guests, and they started screaming and moving toward the exit, but then they heard me say, slow down, stop, and they waited to see what was going to happen. And finally, David used what I call the big line. You don't understand. You can't see it. That's what people do. The presumption is if you can't see it, you don't know. And the reality is when you can't see it, you don't know. The fact is that David wasn't seeing what I was seeing because he was panicking. What David wasn't seeing was that I had a dog sitting next to me, wagging her tail, yawning, going, who woke me up, not giving any indication of fear. And I knew what Roselle was like when she was afraid because she's afraid of thunderstorms. Well, I finally got David to focus and I said, get our guests to the stairs. Do not let them take elevators, because you saw fire. And if that elevator, if those fires are in the at all central part of the building, it's where the elevators are, and people are going to perish. So don't let them,
Absolutely.
don't let them,
Absolutely.
don't let them take the elevators. They got to take the stairs. Well, he got them to the stairs, and meanwhile, I called my wife Karen. The media hadn't gotten the story yet by any stretch of the imagination. She wanted to know more, and I said, all I know is we must have had some sort of a muffled explosion or something. We don't know more, and when I know more, I'll let you know. But we're leaving the building now. David came back. We swept the offices. We went to the stairs, and we started down. And I won't spend a lot of time telling the entire story because I know you've only got a limited amount of time to do this. But the bottom line is, as soon as we got into the stairwell, I began smelling an odor. And it took me about four floors to realize that what I was smelling were the fumes from burning jet fumes.
Yes.
And burning jet fuel. And I realized that it took me about 4 floors to recognize it, but I realized I'm smelling what I smell at airports. And so I observed to other people around me, that odor is the fumes from burning jet fuel. And they said, yeah, we were trying to figure it out. That's what it is. We must have been hit by an airplane. But that's all we knew. All the way down the stairs, that's all we knew.
And Michael, how many minutes does it, and I'm assuming that this stairwell was totally bumper to bumper with people, butt to butt, as we say. So how many minutes do you estimate it took from when you entered the stairwell on the 78th floor to get to ground level? About how long was that?
Not estimation, actual fact. We got to the stairs about 9:50 or 8:50 because I checked my watch. We started down, and at the 30th floor, we met firefighters coming up the stairs. And by then, and I checked my watch again, it was 10 after 9. So it took us 20 minutes to get from floor 78 to floor 30. But then with firefighters coming up and taking a lot of the stairwell, that slowed us down. And it took from 9:10 until 9:35 to get down the other 30 floors. So now that's a total of 45 minutes. And then when we got down to the bottom and got out into the lobby, they wouldn't let anyone go outside through the doors that would go from the lobby to outside, probably because if you had gone outside there, that's where people were jumping from up above, and they didn't want that to be an issue. So people were escorted or shunted through the whole complex to go outside as far away from the Twin Towers as we could be. So we didn't get outside until 9:45. So it was basically almost an hour from the time the plane was hit until we got outside. Once we got outside, David looked around and he said, Mike, there's fire in Tower 2. And I went, what are you talking about? He said, there's fire. We didn't know. The fact is that
plane had hit.
The fact of the matter is we didn't feel it. We didn't hear it. We were in our own little cocoon, if you will, our own little cave going down. All we knew was when we got outside, we were told to leave the area. So we went over to Broadway and started walking north on Broadway. We were on the west side of the street. So to my right was Broadway and to my left was a building. We crossed several streets. We got to Vesey Street and David said, I can see the fire really clear. We're close to Tower 2. I want to take some pictures because he saw the fire in Tower 2 that we had no idea about. Yes. We thought maybe the fire just dumped across from our building because we had no clue. David took out his camera and was taking pictures. I tried to call my wife Karen. I couldn't get through. The circuits were busy.
Right.
Because clearly people was saying goodbye to their loved ones.
Yes.
And so I had just put my phone away and David was putting his camera away when a police officer yelled, get out of here, it's coming down now. We heard this rumble that became this deafening roar. I described the sound as kind of a combination of a freight train and a waterfall. You could hear metal clattering and clashing and glass breaking and so on. And then the white noise of Tower 2, which was about 100 yards away from us, collapsing. Everyone turned and ran. David turned and ran. He was gone. I turned Roselle 180 degrees and started running back the way we came. And we got to the next street now going back. So that was Fulton Street that we had crossed a little while before. And I turned right on Fulton Street because there was debris falling around us and I was hoping I could get out of some of the line of fire from that debris. And it helped a little. I ran about 25 yards and suddenly caught up to David because it turns out that that's the way he had run. And when I caught up to David, he apologized, and I said, don't worry about it, let's keep going. And we ran, and we suddenly were engulfed in all the dust and the dirt and debris from Tower 2's collapse. And we knew we had to get out of it. So now to my right was the building, because we were going the other way. And I told Roselle, go right, right. I don't know whether she could hear me or see my hand signals, but she must have known what I want, because suddenly I heard an opening on the right, and she turned to right to go into that opening, took one step and stopped and wouldn't move. She froze. And I'm going, come on, Roselle. Nope, she wouldn't move. And I realized she stopped for a reason. She's a guide dog. So
Yes.
upon investigation, I realized that we were at the top of a flight of stairs. She did exactly what she was supposed to do. She got a hug for it, and then I said forward, which is the right command, and we went down the stairs and ended up in the arcade entrance to the Fulton Street subway station. We were there with some other people, and an employee of the subway system, a guy named Lou, came and got us and took us all. He discovered us there and took us to an employee locker room. There were already a few other people there, and we just sat there and tried to make sense of it all. And we were there about 15 minutes when a police officer came and said, the air is clear up above. You can't stay here. You need to leave. And he wouldn't wait for discussion. He turned, and we just followed him back to the stairs, up the stairs, through the arcade that I mentioned earlier, and then up the last 2 flights of stairs, and we got outside, and David looked around and he said, oh my God, Mike, there's no Tower 2 anymore. And I said, what do you see? And he said, all I see are pillars of smoke, hundreds of feet tall. There's no Tower 2. It's gone. And we stood there kind of in shock, not understanding. And then we just continued to walk on Fulton Street. We were walking west on Fulton. And we walked about 10 minutes, and then we were in this little plaza area when we heard that freight train waterfall sound again, and we knew that it must be our tower collapsing. And David looked back and he said, there's another dust cloud coming. There was a little retaining wall there, so we got behind it and ducked down, and we waited till everything passed and the sound subsided. We stood up, and David looked around and he said, oh my God, Mike, there's no World Trade Center anymore. And I said, again, what do you see? And he said, all I see are fingers of fire and flame hundreds of feet tall and pillars of smoke. It's gone. To think we had gone in 3 hours before just to do our jobs, and in the blink of an eye, literally, it was all gone. We stood there a couple minutes, and then I tried to call my wife, Karen, and this time I got through to her, and she's the first one who told us how 2 aircraft had been deliberately hijacked and crashed into the towers, a third to the Pentagon, and a fourth was still missing over Pennsylvania. And that's when we knew what happened. I do want to say one other thing. I want to talk about David for a moment. As we were going down the stairs, when we got to about the 50th floor, suddenly David said, Mike, we're going to die. We're not going to make it out of here. And I just yelled at David, stop it, David. If Roselle and I can go down these stairs, so can you. And he told me later that brought him out of the funk that he was going into. And what he wanted to do, he said, was to walk a floor below me and shout up to me what he saw. And he wanted to do that because he wanted to get his mind off of what was going on and off of his imagination. So he wanted something to do. So I said, okay, go ahead. So he started doing that. You know, when I got to the 49th floor, he said, hey, Mike, I'm at the 48th floor, going on down. Walked down a few more floors. I was on 45. And he said, hey, Mike, I'm at the 44th floor. This is where the Port Authority cafeteria is. Not stopping, going on down. And why do I mention that? Because in reality, we all stayed pretty calm going down the stairs. And I think that David shouting up to me was important, not for me necessarily, because you know I've got to go down the stairs anyway. But what David did was, in his shouting of 42nd floor, all's okay, anyone within the sound of his voice knew that there was someone above them or below them who was okay on the stairs. His actions had to help keep lots of people focused going down the stairs, and that doesn't get talked about much. So I like to bring that up because I know that what he did helped a great deal, whether anyone recognizes it or even remembers it or not. But eventually, as I said, we talked to Karen, and then we started moving up toward Midtown Manhattan. And later that afternoon, I learned the trains were running and went with David to the Penn Station train station and caught a train out to New Jersey. David left me there and walked up to the Upper East Side. He wanted to stay with his sister, and so that was where he was staying anyway. So I went to New Jersey, and he did that. And I called my wife and told her a friend of ours, Tom Painter, who had been a friend of Karen since high school out in California, was also living in New Jersey. And as soon as he heard that something happened, he just came down to our house, not knowing whether I was working from home that day or in the office or what. He drove Karen to the train station, and they picked me up and we went home. And so it was kind of over. And as soon as we got home, I took Roselle's harness off. I wanted to take her outside. She would have none of it. She just ran off and grabbed her favorite tug bone and started playing tug of war with my retired guide dog, Linny, because it was over for her. It was all done. She was fine. Nothing threatened her. And so she wanted to play. Dogs don't do what if. And in my new book, Live Like a Guide Dog, that's one of the things that we talk about. We focus so much as humans on trying to control everything or worrying about controlling everything that we don't recognize there's only a very limited amount of stuff that we have control over. And if we would stop trying to worry about and control every little thing, especially all the stuff we don't have influence over, we would be a lot less fearful, we would be a lot more open to trust, and we would live much better lives.
The tariff wars, as I call them, are in full swing. When Trump announced the actual start of the tariffs from Mexico, Canada, and China, the stock market took a big downturn as retaliatory tariffs are being threatened. The new Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, is in the spotlight as he suggests certain items may be excluded from those threatened tariffs. I also think applying the same tariff to Canada and Mexico is a mistake. I do think the countries are planning to work it out with the Trump administration. I also strongly agree with Trump's reciprocal tariff announcement. This is especially aimed at the European Union, which has taken advantage of the USA for years. The starting point was America's generosity in helping to rebuild Europe after World War II. That was called the Marshall Plan. Well, the need for such breaks passed long ago. Instead of playing fair, Europe and India have charged big tariffs while the USA has been far more generous. Ending America being a sucker in these deals is really a good idea. Related to this, Trump just warned Japan and China against devaluing their currencies. One way for a country to gain an advantage in international transactions is to devalue their currency. This makes their goods cheaper on the international market, and this could balance Trump's tariff plan. Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. Promoted as the largest rodeo in the world, the Houston Livestock Show and its predecessors have been around since 1931. The show has been integral to the success of Houston, including being involved in the development of the famed Astrodome. The show meets for 3 to 4 weeks early every spring. The kickoff is a World Championship Barbecue Cook-Off, which I've attended in the past. The rodeo itself features a series of evening or weekend concert events with famous musical acts doing one set after about an hour of traditional rodeo activities. The admission fees and sponsorships are used to cover the overhead, and then the rest is dedicated to scholarships for the youth who raise and display their animals. During the daytime, visitors can tour the huge area with many stables full of horses, cows, pigs, and other animals, as well as tons of booths selling quite a variety of wares. There's a typical carnival operation in the outdoors, of course. I've been a life member of the Livestock Show for over 30 years. Unfortunately, like a lot of things, the cost of the shows, admissions, parking, and the carnival rides has increased a lot. A funny note was that the news today is a cow somehow escaped from the livestock grounds and was reportedly taking a tour of that section of the city. Hopefully the cow gets back safe. I'm pretty sure the whole world knows about the atrocities on October 7, 2023. 1,200 innocent civilians were slaughtered. 250 hostages were taken. A handful returned under a badly botched USA hostage plan some months back. But the rest have been held under terrible conditions. Many of them are dead. In fact, most recently, 6 hostages, including an American, were executed rather than allowing them to be rescued by the IDF. Gaza stands in ruins, which is sadly appropriate, given the cowardly Hamas hide behind their own civilians. I do quickly point out that UN workers and civilians were involved in the attack on the innocent Israelis on October 7th. In other words, I have zero sympathy for the ludicrous and brainless protesters against Israel. With the recent Israeli approach to bombing the terrorists in Lebanon and Yemen, it appears that Israel, pointedly without the support of USA and France, is doing the work for the rest of the world and cleaning up these major terrorist threats. The whole world waits to see what Israel will do with Iran. If you see a folded dollar bill on the ground, do not pick it up. This one was prompted by a report by Dave Basner citing a 2023 post on Facebook by Lane County, Kansas Sheriff's Department. Quote, earlier this afternoon, a citizen contacted the on-duty deputy to report they had found a folded $1 bill in their yard. Upon unfolding it, a white substance spilled out. The post goes on to say that the bill was tested for drugs. It tested positive for methamphetamines, but negative for fentanyl and opiates. The Lane County Sheriff's Office says it's common for drug users and dealers to transport drugs in folded money or paper, and it can be exceptionally hazardous if the drug is fentanyl or something like that. It is important to remain vigilant about potential hazards in your surroundings. Hey, it used to be that finding money was a good thing. Slopstream media meltdown. I'm not sure the claims of the conservative talking heads and networks are completely correct, but we may soon stop referring to the incompetence at NBC, CBS, ABC, CNN, etc. as the legacy media. Parallel to this, virtually all the polls were wrong. It's time for the adults in the room to take over. Might be nice to find a network that covers a broad range of news. I find that I prefer local newscasts lately because they cover real news that impacts me and not the repetitive stuff. In addition, I am here on an internet network and not TV or radio, but the numbers for this show, even in the early going, are pretty impressive. Think about the impact of Trump on the Joe Rogan experience. Many point out that one appearance at that huge contrast between a mostly hidden and always scripted Harris and a much looser Trump. But the media itself is also part of the story. Rogan's show was not on a TV channel and not even a radio channel. It was on the internet, folks. Podcast. I equally criticize Newsmax and the new online conservative media outlets for being Trump all the time. They missed a lot of real news as well. Fox is all over the place these days, but unfortunately not in a positive way. They need to find their way forward. An interesting report from the Los Angeles Times promises a new editorial board, a balanced one. Remember the brouhaha over the rag not making a recommendation in this year's presidential race. The owner, Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong, has decided to emphasize different views based on his posting on X. We shall see if this comes to pass. Keep in mind that he is in one of the most left-wing markets in the country. He may be fair and balanced and bankrupt. Let's see what happens. All of us are aware that there's unfortunately a continuing controversy of biological males playing in collegiate women's sports. The College Fix recently noted a series of deliberate defaults to the San Jose State women's volleyball team due to their having a male athlete. While it seems like that might not be a big deal, but if a big biological male smashes a volleyball at your daughter, you may be dealing with a concussion or worse. Idaho Governor Brad Little praised Boise State's decision to forfeit a game. He stated, "I applaud Boise State for working within the spirit of my executive order, the Defending Women's Sports Act. We need to ensure player safety for all of our female athletes and continue the fight for fairness in women's sports." So not every politician out there is a whack job. As we grow up, a common reference for success or failure is the letter grade. Whether we are in grammar school or college, we all want an A grade and certainly regard an F as a big failure. Here at Saving America, we scan the news for reports of celebrities, politicians, or others who just end up in the public eye. So the A grades are awarded to people and organizations for great service to their communities, and the F grades, of course, are unfortunately more common, are awarded to those who need to do a lot better. This story was initially reported by Fox News and some other outlets. Zeb Hadley, a private helicopter owner and CEO of National Coatings, ended up saving an 11-day-old baby who was born prematurely just before Hurricane Helene struck in North Carolina. Hadley explained, I actually received a text message from our Lieutenant Governor, Mark Robinson, and he said, hey, Zeb, I know you have a helicopter. Can you please stop in Franklin County and talk to the Sheriff's Department and talk to Kevin White? The sheriff asked how I could help him run some missions for McDowell County. And after that, we just kind of went on our own little search and rescue because we saw how bad the devastation was. On September 30th, 3 days after the worst of Helene struck, Hadley and two others, Florida State Guardsmen Jonathan Howard and Aerial Recovery's Charlie Keebaugh, were sent on a mission to rescue what they were told was a 1-year-old baby in a life or death situation. They went to the area where the baby was located via helicopter, and a paramedic got the baby stabilized on oxygen right away. Hadley explained, and when we landed, we realized that the baby was not a year old. Then we found out it was just 11 days old, born premature, and had just gotten home 4 days prior, I assume prior to when the hurricane hit. The baby was blue. Thank God, just all of this came together. The team flew the baby to a hospital, landing on the roof of the hospital, and they saved the baby. This great neighbor in America stayed in the area for 7 days and flew his helicopter for approximately 60 hours. He added that he typically puts only about 100 miles a year on his helicopter. Hadley's comment, so we did 7 months of work flying in just 7 days. Therefore, Saving America awards Zeb Hadley, a businessman from North Carolina, and his team the coveted Saving America A grade for his and his team's heroic action. Our series of interviews for Saving America establishes that the world is full of interesting people, and I think you'll agree with me that A.E. Lee, who's making her first appearance on Saving America, is one of those very interesting people. She graduated from Temple University with a degree in poli-sci and worked with the now governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro. Realizing that politics was not going to be her chosen career, she obtained a master's in education from Marymount University and a second master's in educational leadership from George Mason University. And she is presently a teacher in Northern Virginia. She's also an author with a focus on the important and timely topic of domestic violence. She has written a book about her own struggles called One of the Lucky Ones, and a related book, Always, which we will be talking about today. Amanda has been involved in supporting others facing domestic violence issues in their own lives. We welcome A.E. Lee for her first appearance on Saving America.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. As you know, we ask our guests 3 questions, and the first one is, tell us about this book. One of the Lucky Ones describes your own life struggles. Please share with the audience a little bit about the story that you tell in this important book.
Yeah, One of the Lucky Ones is my memoir, and it's about my escape from a domestic violence situation and the aftermath. And it was really therapeutic. That's why I started writing. I never intended to do anything with it. It was one of the many things that was suggested to me after I got out of a domestic violence marriage. And once I escaped and my focus was my children, and I put all of my eggs in that basket, I made sure that they had the therapy, I did everything. And I finally realized I needed to focus on myself. One of the things that someone suggested was, oh, why don't you write? And I have never been a writer. I love those pretty journals that you find in Barnes and Noble, and I would pick them up. I'm like, oh, these are pretty. And then they would just like sit in the corner. And one night I just started thinking about like, well, I guess I could start talking about this. And oh, maybe this chapter would be called this. And it just kind of, it was like word vomit. It just poured out of me. And I wrote it and I just put it aside. I was like, maybe I'll show my kids someday so they can truly understand, because they were really little when it happened. And then I showed it to one of my girlfriends and she's like, you need to publish this. Even if this helps just one other person hearing your story, you need to publish this. And I sat on it for a little bit longer and I was like, you know what? She's right. If I just help one other person who my story resonates with and helps them to, wake up. That's what I call it. You kind of wake up. You're in a trance a little bit when you're in a domestic violence situation. And then you wake up and you're like, oh my God, what is happening to me? Then it's worth it. So it's my memoir about how I met my ex-husband and our marriage and why I stayed, and then the after part of it, which no one really talks about, that the scariest and most dangerous time for a domestic violence victim is the aftermath, when you finally decide to leave and leave.
And why is that?
It's because the abuser has lost control.
Mm-hmm.
They have no control over you anymore. You've left the situation. So then they resort to other things. For mine, I was stalked, I was harassed, and I felt very little support with the criminal justice system. And please don't get me wrong, I have the utmost respect for police officers, for any type of law enforcement, for anyone in the court system. But because I had never called before, there was very little done to my ex-husband. He was basically just given a slap on the wrist. And a lot of the things he was doing, stalking, he convinced one of our neighbors at one point to gain access to their camera so he could watch me coming and going. Even that, it was considered hearsay. There wasn't enough evidence to protect me.
And which jurisdiction were you in at that time?
Fairfax County, Virginia.
Okay, because I know you've been in Pennsylvania and other locations. And what level did you reach? I mean, did you ever have him arrested?
He was arrested. There was a domestic violence kind of implosion on August 3rd, 2019 at 8:59 p.m. It will forever be ingrained in my mind. And it started out as a fight. He ended up throwing water on me, and then he threatened to burn the house down with myself and the children in it. And I grabbed my babies and we ran to my neighbor's house, who was a police officer at the time, and I called 911, and they ended up picking him up and he was arrested. And that kind of started that was, while traumatic for myself and my children, that was my open door. That was my way out. And I was able to get out, and I got a protective order, and I was somewhat protected from him. But it took a while.
It doesn't sound like the protective order protected you from stalking, because that happened after you got separated, right?
It did. And at that point, I had a permanent protective order, which is really, it's not permanent. It's only 2 years. I don't know why they call it permanent. And with the protective order, I mean, by the time we renewed it, when the 2 years were up, we renewed it for another year. The protective order was like 10 pages long because I kept adding things to it. Like, he can't surveil me. Well, it's in the protective order, but there wasn't concrete evidence that he was using our neighbor's camera to watch me, even though he had submitted the neighbor's camera video footage in our divorce proceedings. The police told me that wasn't enough to consider stalking.
It's so troubling. And as you know, I'm very hardcore law and order, and it seems that sometimes our legal system lets down the most needy. And speaking of the most needy, our second question is about the children. Sometimes an ignored aspect of domestic violence is the impact on the children in these relationships. Explain to our audience how your book always can help.
Yeah, so it really came out of what I used to tell my children to comfort them. So I am an educator, and when this all happened, I was looking for a picture book. My children were 3 and 5 at the time, and I wanted something that I could read to them, that they would be comforted by, that was broad enough, that wasn't like specifically what happened, but gave them comfort. And I couldn't find anything. I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was. So this book, entitled Always, really comes out of what I used to say to my son when he would wake up in the middle of the night after this incident happened, and it was just the 3 of us in the house. And I would always say that, I promise I always will protect you, just like I did that night. And he would go, always, always. I'm like, always, I've got you, buddy. And then reading the book to them, I mean, first of all, they think it's amazing. They think they're famous.
Well, they are. We're working on it today, aren't we?
Yeah. So reading the book to them, even now, even though they're older and they don't want to admit it, it's still comforting to them on nights that they might feel a little off.
Mhm. Well, and as we mentioned, it's one of the things that sometimes we're so focused on the criminal justice system, the divorce thing, and things like that. And part of the follow-up on that is, of course, is that even in a difficult divorce, the father still has access to these children under normal visitation. What's the current situation on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's taking us a long time to get where we are, but
Mhm.
we are actually fabulous co-parents, which no one believes when I first say it. I mean, we started off with he had no visitation whatsoever, and then we moved to supervised visitation, and then it was limited. Now we're up to almost 50. And the reason why we've been able to get there is we both have done the work that we needed to do. He took every suggestion that the court gave him on what he needed. He ended up having a diagnosis of bipolar and got on medication for that. I did everything and anything anyone suggested to help heal. We had a co-parent mediator at one point after our divorce. I mean, she was kind of awful, but it taught us how to talk to each other. And at the end of the day, my dad's always like, I don't know how you're friendly with him. And I'm like, I'm not friends with him. But at the end of the day, I had children with him and my kids are little. This man is not going anywhere. And Virginia is a big unification state. So I'm never going to be able to just have them all the time and protect them. And I have to learn how to work with him. And it's taken a really long time to be able to sit next to him at a sporting event and feel comfortable and not feel the fight or flight moments.
Now, the neat thing is you're also involved in other activities to help with regard to people dealing with domestic violence. Can you share a little bit more with our audience about what you're doing and different activities that people can engage in who are experiencing these issues?
Yeah, I'm involved in the court system in Fairfax County. I am one of the volunteers that escorts domestic violence victims into court and is just kind of there to hold their hand. A lot of my advocacy work has come from people who have picked up my memoir and have reached out to me directly. And it's ranges from just a quick note of, your story is the reason I left because I realized it was happening to me, to, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening to me. Like, what do I do? I need help. And I've helped several dozen women get out of situations that were similar to mine.
Well, that's a very important situation. Have you seen over the time that you've been dealing with, have you seen any improvement in the court system in terms of dealing with these issues better?
No. Unfortunately, I haven't. And, I know the court system is in place to, hear both sides and give the benefit of the doubt to a first offender, but there's got to be some wiggle room. There's got to be some reform when it comes to domestic violence. I mean, I had police officers that could attest to the assault that I had that night because throwing water on someone is considered assault. And still, my ex walked away with a slap on the wrist.
Mm-hmm. It's still a lot of challenges ahead, I would say, and all that. But hopefully, books like yours, both your books, and I know you've written some other material, will help raise the visibility, and maybe we can make some progress in the justice system. I also think that the pendulum is swinging, so to speak, where we've had a kind of a period where the focus seems to be on the aggressor and not the victim. And I'm hoping that we're going to get speaking of balance, a little bit more balance. So
I hope so too. Yeah.
Hopefully we'll get there. Well, how can our audience get more information about you, A.E. Lee, and your books and your other outreach activities?
Yeah, absolutely. They can go to my website, which is authораelee.com. They can also follow me on Instagram, which I'm at author A.E. Lee.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Amanda. Business students, business persons, or consumers, Business law impacts much of what you do. This segment is designed to help you get past the headlines on key stories. 22 years in prison for truck driver distracted by TikTok videos in a fatal crash. In an extraordinarily sad story, Danny Glenn Tyner, 38, a truck driver, has been sentenced to 22 years in prison for causing an accident that killed 5 people. In the accident, the 18-wheeler he was driving along Interstate 10 in Arizona crashed into 2 cars, which crushed the cars up against the back of another 18-wheeler. The cars then burst into flames. The report was that Interstate 10 was closed ahead of the driver due to an earlier crash involving multiple trucks. This caused the traffic to slow down. Tyner continued speeding along. According to his GPS, he was still doing 68 miles per hour. He did not slow down as he approached the slower traffic. Tyner claimed at the time he was distracted by a message from his trucking company on his work tablet, and when he looked up, it was too late to avoid the accident. However, due to modern technology, an investigation showed that Tyner was not looking at his work tablet. He had accessed at least 4 TikTok videos on his cell phone within seconds of the collision. We hear about teenagers doing that and causing accidents. However, for a 38-year-old truck driver in the size of an 18-wheeler, this is particularly reprehensible. Therefore, he pled guilty to 5 counts of manslaughter. The Arizona Department of Public Safety said the case was the first case in its history in which a driver has been convicted of causing a fatal collision while distracted by social media. Maricopa County Attorney Rachel Mitchell stated, "As a driver, you have an obligation to pay attention to the road. To choose to access social media while driving, placing the lives of others on the line is reckless." As parents, we warn our new drivers of the need to put down the phone and focus on the driving. Our society certainly relies on adults and especially professional drivers to be so much more observant. A rescue dog leads police to injured 84-year-old owner, thereby saving his life. The story was carried by multiple sources, including NTD. So a couple of weeks ago, Deputy Wright of the Stevens County Sheriff's Office in Washington State was out patrolling a rural wooded area. All of a sudden, he comes across a dog sitting in the middle of the road. It was a black and white border collie. And most people know dogs, know border collies are darn smart. The officer got out of his vehicle but didn't see anyone around. He tried to get the dog into his cruiser, but the dog just wouldn't go. He then did a survey of the nearby homes, but there was nothing visible that he could see. By this time, the dog was laying in the middle of the road. When Deputy Wright approached the dog then got up and trotted up a little used trail. He followed to find an 84-year-old man with a broken leg who could not move. He helped the man who had been there for hours to safety. The 13-year-old dog named Gita was a rescue dog. I believe she has repaid her owner for rescuing her. Thanks for joining me for Saving America. If you have questions or comments, please find me on various social media sites. I'm Dr. David D. Schein, and I will see you next week.
Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.